Welcome to Unleashed at Work and Home. I'm Colleen Pilar, and this is where pet professionals come for honest conversations about what it really takes to show up for yourself while serving the animals you love. If you've ever felt caught between compassion and exhaustion, you're in the right place. Here we explore what it means to reconnect with your inner wisdom and rediscover the joy that brought you to this work. Make sure to join my email community at colleenpilar.com for gentle, practical insights designed specifically for pet professionals. Now, let's dive in. Welcome back to Unleashed at Work and Home. My guest today is Holden Svirsky, and she's a dog trainer who has so many specializations, but I say Svirsky with a nice American accent, and I would love for you to hear how it's supposed to be said. So, Holden, could you please tell me how we say your name?
Oh, it's Svirsky.
Isn't that cool? My tongue doesn't quite do that, but I think it's super cool. So, hi, tell us a little bit about you and what you do.
Well, I've been in this field now for about 15 years, and I think maybe like most people, I don't know if it is most people, and who knows what the actual numbers are, but I got started working with animals as a volunteer in a shelter. I had adopted a dog, and I had been laid off during the recession in '08, and thought that, it was time to fill up my day with something productive. And so found myself going back to where I had adopted my dog from so that I could get back a little bit, and became just quite lit up by everything that was going on, learning so much. I was extremely lucky to have early on met some very knowledgeable people who were at that time already employing some of what were then, I think, kind of cutting edge techniques in terms of
Hmm.
animal management, training, welfare, enrichment, all of those things. So I was super lucky to have been exposed to that quite early and fell in love with the work. A full-time position opened up at that shelter, and I thought, hey, this is meant to be for some reason or another. It did feel a little bit like a calling. I remember actually saying that in my interview, which may have worked out well for me at the time. So I became an adoption counselor and did that for a number of years. That shelter was then merged with the San Francisco SPCA. So I began working for them again as an adoption counselor. And that is where I met some of the folks working in the behavior department and started to learn more about animal behavior, which did take me back to some of the work I had done actually with humans during my undergraduate and graduate work way back a long time ago when I was actually in school. And I realized how much I sort of already knew, just didn't think to apply it to
Hmm.
companion animals. So there was some kind of unlearning and relearning, but learning theory was familiar to me. And so I found that it was just a really great fit. So I worked in shelters, a number of shelters for the better part of a decade. I've done almost every job in the shelter at some point. I mean, from, cleaning kennels to, enrichment to training volunteers to intake, including driving a big box truck all over the state of California. I was telling a client recently, I've been to, I think, almost every municipal shelter in California at some point, especially in the Central Valley, but also
Wow.
further north. So I've seen quite a spectrum, obviously, of what that looks like and what resources are available or
Hmm.
unavailable.
Hmm.
So very, very familiar, at least with the situation here on the West Coast. And then in 2019, I opened up my own consulting business. So after receiving a number of certifications, that seemed like the best next step for me. And I've been doing that now. So yeah, so it's been almost 7 years of that.
Hmm. Awesome. Thank you. I love that. And a question I always love to ask people is what did you think that you were going to be when you grew up? Like when you were 10, what did you think? Because you had a whole career. 2008 was a shift point, but what what was that? What did you think and what did you actually do?
Yeah, I wasn't the kid who wanted to be a veterinarian. Um, I always had pets, but that, yeah, I think at some point I wanted to be a ballerina. Um,
Mhm.
I, I do still consider myself an artist. I write and paint. So, the, money making ability in those fields is not, I mean, not that it's amazing working with animals, but probably even less so. So, while behavior consulting is my quote unquote day job, I have a number of occupations, we'll call it.
That's kind of awesome. Um, I'm pretty sure it's Liz Gilbert. I might be wrong. I think it's Liz Gilbert who said that she promised her creative side that it would never have to support her, that she would work to support her creative side, and
Mm.
that it would allow the creative side to thrive and grow. And so being able to paint or dance or write or whatever, we don't always have to have that be the thing that fills the refrigerator. Uh, so that seems fair.
Yeah, potentially when it does, it becomes less of a passion for you. And I also sometimes find that is something that I think about in terms of working with animals because it began as a passion and it does continue to be a passion. But I think that having other, again, sort of occupations and things that I do with my time keeps me passionate about the work that I do, even though, yes, it is technically required to pay my bills. So having my hands in sort of multiple fields is important so that it just doesn't become, I mean, we all have to do paperwork, we all have to pay our taxes, of course, but I don't want this work to become drudgery all of the time.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's really important. So what did you get a degree in and what did you do until 2008?
Oh gosh, I my degree is in literature, so not not animals. And I had a number of jobs. I mean, I worked in commercial real estate and property management for a while. That's what I was doing prior to working in the shelter. So very much a, 9 to 5 downtown girl at that point.
Mhm.
Not something that I've ever thought of going back to, that's for sure.
No?
No,
Not the same level of passion there, huh?
no, no. Perhaps a little more lucrative, I think, depending, but
Yeah. Yeah. Probably. Probably. So, what is it that you find most fulfilling about your work right now?
it is absolutely connection with my community. It is with the people that I work with. That is the most important thing to me. Again, I adore animals. I connect with animals. They bring me joy. I mean, the entire spectrum of emotions, truly. They make me feel like both a human and an animal and connect me to nature. But I think that, especially in times that are stressful or transition or, with world events that we have no control over, the antidote for that feeling of having no control is connection and connection with my
Mhm.
community. So I love hearing people talk about their animals. I love finding things that my clients are already doing really well and that they really enjoy, and being able to encourage more of that. I mean, technically, this is positive reinforcement with humans, but it's so much more. There
Yeah.
is, I think, with that connection, even if it is remotely and not in person, and I do a hybrid of both, it's so needed to feel supported by another human being. I realize that there's a spectrum of information and that you can kind of DIY and find out on the internet, or, ask AI, but there really isn't something that can substitute connection and communication with another human being who empathizes and has the ability to help one understand that they are not alone in this problem, that there are
Mhm.
very few zebras out there. And even if it is a zebra, that we will find someone who's an expert in zebras, right? To help support them, and just feeling a part of my community, for me, and seeing how that also helps others. I mean, I have clients come back sometimes years later to share stories, sometimes successes, sometimes, I don't really love this word, but failures or losses, and keep in touch. And those connections are so, so important to me. I think it goes beyond sort of a service transaction, that these are really relationships.
Yeah. That's what I love too. I think it's so deep and you don't always know what any given connection might give you or give them. Um, but it's all nuance. The richness of human experience and having people to share elements of it with makes it more of our own experience, more that we're, I don't know, alive and awake and living our lives as opposed to just kind of doing the same thing. Just keep it going, keep it going, keep it going. So that
Yeah.
connection matters.
And slowing down a little bit.
Mhm.
I will admit to being the type of person sometimes when I'm just trying to gather in a lot of information or learn something new, especially when it's online. I do things that I'm a little embarrassed to admit this, but I'll speed up I don't know if anyone's actually doing this right now with the podcast, but I'll speed up the tone of voice, or the
Mhm.
speed of the recording. And while that helps things get into my brain a little bit quicker, there's something about the breath and the cadence, and maybe this is because I'm a writer and a poet, that when we're interacting with humans in a face-to-face conversation, there's something in those pauses and that empty space too.
Mhm.
There's something about having the time to read each other in nonverbal ways that we just don't get online as much.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I do listen to podcasts and things, usually at 1.25, and occasionally, if the person was a particularly leisurely narrator, sometimes as much as 1.5. My husband swears that nobody could listen to me, at 1.25 or 1.5 because I talk too fast for him in my regular speech. I don't think that's true. I think there are some listeners out there who can follow along with me, even speed it up a bit, but I don't know. So if anyone does, let me know because he is like, "Whoa." My natural cadence is a bit abrupt for him.
Mhm.
But I agree that there's a lot that happens, particularly in face-to-face conversation, in the quiet, in the pause, and in audio only too, but even more so in face-to-face because we're conscious of the other person interpreting, integrating, pondering, understanding or not understanding, like, we can see some of that happening in real time, and it helps on all of the levels of, empathy and connection and all of those pieces.
Yeah, nature is slow.
Mhm. Yeah. And change can be slow. I mean, it can happen quickly, but often it happens slow, and one of my frustration complaints at times when I'm feeling cranky about that is, like, if you've spent 5 years or 10 years changing a way that you show up for yourself, something is shifting for you. 5 or 10 years out of 80 is a pretty big chunk. Like like, "Oh, come on, can we do this faster? Could we have it?" And yet, nature is slow. Like, we need to adapt, we need to adjust, we need to continue in small increments and maintain those and keep going, and, um, we're not we do better that way, typically, if we allow things to take the time they need to take, while continuing to focus on it and address it, It's not neglect, but just allowing the space and time for things to unfold.
I agree.
I ask all of my guests to share words that matter to them, and you shared these: "A smooth sea never made a skillful mariner." Tell me about that. Like, where where did that phrase come to you? At what time in your life? What did it mean to you then? And why does it stick? And
It sounds so trite, but it was a fortune cookie slip of paper that
love
that
that.
phrase came to me. However, I later became a sailor and saw that this, adage could be applied to as many things, frankly, in sailing, which again is a lot about, working with nature rather than against nature.
Mhm.
And is definitely a skill set. There's so many. I wrote a blog comparing actually good animal management to how we think about sailing and becoming a sailor some time ago. But there's so many overlaps there where there's a lot of, I think, for me, a reminder of acceptance of certain things that we cannot control and that there are lessons in these rough waters, right? And so, if everything is easy peasy, just follow this little recipe step by step, and your, dog, say, is going to, learn these things and their behavior, poof, magic wand, it's going to be, a linear progression. That's not reality, and also you will not learn how to troubleshoot, right?
Mhm.
And so that is actually one of my goals in the work that I do, is to help give people the tools and hopefully work with them long enough that we actually see plateaus and regressions and run into tricky scenarios and share with them my thinking process so that they see, okay, here are the things we can try. Here are the, I think, the risks and the benefits of potentially any one of these interventions. And this also goes for, if we're talking about organizations, right? This can also be applied to, a nonprofit organization or a municipal organization like a shelter or a rescue. I think that can then empower growth in the individual and or the team that is doing the problem solving, and will help inform their problem solving skills in the future, right? And not everything is going to work for every case, but if everything, I mean, this is life, right? If everything
Mm.
was super easy, then you wouldn't learn anything. You would just do the same exact thing every time. And then inevitably, when something hit you really hard and you were like, why isn't it working? Why can't I just push this button and have, behavior change? there's going to be feelings of shame and guilt and frustration and, you know, feeling as if this methodology as a whole doesn't work. And, it's, it, it can get people to quit, frankly. And
Mhm.
so sometimes, that exposure to those stressors early on or some of those little frustrations, maybe it's not, to continue on this metaphor, maybe it's not a gale force wind storm, but a little bit of chop in there that we have to deal with, or maybe something breaks and we have to do a quick fix, in the moment, and then realize, hey, we are not equipped in this moment to be here right now, and we need to go back to safe harbor and reassess. And to not look at those things as failures, but as skill building, and that we
Mhm.
become better sort of captains of our ships.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. One of the things that just popped into my head when you were saying that is that we do require challenge to learn and grow. Like, we need to have a little bit of, like, how does this work and how can we adapt it? And and it will come in different levels, but it's the art and the action of learning in the moment and seeing what worked and what didn't, um, where we get the most value. So, I have hip issues, chronic, forever, and
Mm,
one of the exercises that I'm supposed to do is a standing on one leg thing, and with the other leg is moving and doing all sorts of things, and I'm standing on one leg, and they're like, "Stand by a counter or something that you can put your hand down onto to restabilize yourself if you need to, but as much as possible, don't," you know? Because there's 8,000 little micro movements when you're on one leg trying to stay there, uh, and stabilize through the whole system while the other one is moving around, and that there's learning happening all the time. Like, this is
mhm.
too much, this is too little. Oh, I can actually do this. Amazing. And sailing feels very much like that, that you have the craft and you're trying to move it, but you're on an unsteady surface of water. It moves, it changes, and then the air moves and changes, and then the balance of the human on the sailboat moves and changes. And all of that will teach you something that may or may not be replicable if we were to do it again in 5 minutes. We can't say, like, okay, so that's what happened. Now let's do it again, because all of that might be different
Right, the
in
conditions
but
might be
you've learned
different.
something.
Yes, yes, exactly. And when I bring that back to animals, I mean, you're right. It's like, we're talking about, hey, nature is slow, but there is so much happening in these moments, right? In this second, in this period. And it's very much about course corrections. There's
Mhm,
there's no perfection here. And learning how to make the decisions about how to do these course corrections, which may be, quite subtle sometimes.
mhm.
Loosening a little bit up on the leash pressure, which people are very loath to do because they always feel like, the more I'm choking up, the more control I have, right? But, that's just one example. Or just deciding when to let something play out for maybe a half a second longer than you
Mhm.
have in the past, maybe a social interaction, but also keeping your eye on the ball in terms of body language and noticing the subtleties of this, figuring out where we can make choices available to the animal so that they are available and desirable and potentially rehearsed, right? But also having contingency plans, right? Sometimes you do have to put your
Mhm.
hands onto the countertop, right? Sometimes we do have to U-turn and just get out of Dodge.
Yep.
And again, not a failure. There's also information there, right? And it doesn't mean that you don't try again. It just means that, okay, let's rehearse and go back and, in a period of quiet, think about, what did we see? And I'll often have these interview style conversations with people about whether it's a volunteer at an organization or a staff member or a private client, what did you notice? And sometimes they can't always necessarily put their finger on it. I don't expect everybody to be an expert in body language.
Hmm.
Sometimes, especially with the younger folks I work with, it's just the vibes were off, right? And that's a fine answer too, because I do believe that, while we have these ethograms of behavior and, large agreement on body language for certain species and what it quote unquote means, I also do believe in sometimes our human animal senses and maybe ones that we don't have language for in that moment.
Hmm.
And I trust people, especially the people who have a relationship with that individual companion animal, with their pet, that they can learn to notice more and more. They can learn to pick things up, whereas I may be really good at noticing, the tiniest of lip curls or a tail going still for a millisecond or something like that. If for them it just feels like a vibe and that helps them identify when stress is increasing, that's fine. They don't, I don't need them to become ethologists and to, have the scientific language for it. I just need them to have that feeling so that they can identify it in the future
Yeah.
and course correct as necessary.
Yeah. And it is a knowing that they have. It's that they don't necessarily have the language to articulate their knowing, but
Right.
but
People
they
know
have a
more, I
knowing.
think, than they think they do. Sometimes I think we can get ourselves a little overeducated,
Mhm.
and stop listening to those inner voices, um, that aren't using words
Yeah.
necessarily.
Yeah. Language is not the it is not our first go-to. We have our experience and then we make meaning about our experience and then we try to put it into language. And then if we add in another person, then they have to interpret our language and make meaning from that and then guess at what our experience was. So we've got this sort of
Mm.
awkward hierarchy where we're losing all sorts of data at every level. What did I have in my experience versus what meaning did I make? I've left some of it out already, and then by the time I put words to it. So, yeah, but it is so valuable to ask people, what did you notice? Because it turns their attention inward, even to that spot of not having language. Like, well, I did notice something. I don't know if I can tell you what I noticed, but you're creating the awareness internally for them to start noticing. How am I how am I tracking this companion animal? What am I noticing about it? What am I feeling about what I'm noticing? All of that. Super helpful.
Yeah, not just noticing outward, but inward too, because, while I don't believe that a pet can, become stressed just because we are stressed, I think when people become more aware of their sort of own internal weather, if you will,
Mhm.
then that's going to inform maybe what they do in that moment when they are faced with a challenge. And that can be shifted and changed over time. But it's also just good to know, like, what are our go tos? Where's our safe place to get to so that we feel better and more confident? Um, I don't want to try to protect humans as well as animals from 100% of stress. I think that's a fool's errand, but I want consent from everybody about,
Mhm.
what level we push towards, and also helping them know what to do if that felt like too much in the moment.
Mhm.
And I think too, we sometimes have these blind spots where we're focused so much on this dichotomy of good behavior, bad behavior, or
Mhm.
I'm a good owner or a bad owner of an animal. And like getting people out of that type of thinking is really important to me. We all have good days and not so good
Yeah.
days, but the black and white thinking can be crushing, and again can cause us to give up prematurely, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree. So what's something that you've learned about yourself as a result of all your work with animals?
I am a lot more patient than I thought I was, but I don't know that I could have come to this work earlier in my life. I mean, I'm in my 40s now. So, um, I really respect folks that have been doing this for, since sometimes they were like teenagers, working in this field. I don't know that I was the type of person in my teens and 20s that could have done this because, at that point, I mean, I was just a completely different person then. So anyone who says that people don't change, I think is I've very much changed. I mean, there's themes and things that are the same certainly, but yes, I'm a lot more patient with animals, with other people, and with myself. And if you had told me 20 years ago that I would have the patience that I do now, I don't think I would have believed it at all. So it was a nice thing to discover. I've also discovered, I mean, in a very practical way, how to determine whether or not a case, a project, a particular client is a good fit for me, and what barriers, and I mean, not barriers so much as I guess boundaries is the key word now, but um, what I need to do for myself to keep me going long term here. And, that all of that stuff is very personal to the individual and it shifts sometimes. I'm about to take a nice long break and I'm noticing that I timed it correctly because the last week or so has been a little extra stressful and I'm having to let a few things fall off the plates and
Mhm.
decide, let's let's put this down or let's back burner this thing right now. And I used to feel a lot of guilt about that too. I used to
Mhm.
have, I think early in my career, there was a sort of I can do it all, um, you know, verging on maybe savior complex stuff. And now what I've learned about myself is that I think I have the most impact and do the best work, and I have the most ability to stay in this work when things are in balance in terms of just, working in my corner, choosing the right folks, being able to now I'm very fortunate to have such a wide network where if, an inquiry comes to me or somebody asks for something or, I don't feel that we're the best fit, that there are lots of other folks and resources that I can give them so that they're not just, floating out there into the abyss. So that's really helpful. My connection with this is something I would love to talk more about, but the connection with my colleagues, this can be very lonely, especially if you work for yourself. And so I make a huge point to meet up in person with other people who are working in this field and build those relationships and those connections. Now, none of us are getting paid for that time. Sometimes we talk directly about work and about our cases, obviously, without names or identifying details.
Right.
Privacy is also very important to me. Hive mind some things, but also sometimes it's just about, again, connecting with another person, and with someone who understands what this work
Mhm.
is like. And so that's a big part of, I think, my job, if you will, even though it's not sort of directly a paid part, it pays off huge dividends. I mean, with referrals, which go both ways, with not feeling so alone. It is something that the Pet Professional Guild has identified as a need. And so I forgot to mention that I chair a committee for the Pet Professional Guild, the Shelter and Rescue Committee. But another committee is working on a project called Behavior Teams, which is helping to provide a framework for folks that maybe don't have um, as much of a connection with the other people working in the field, especially in their area. And I think that sometimes we are, and I may have been at one point afraid to either reach out or connect because we're like, well, these are the people that we're competing with, right?
Mhm.
That there's this sense of scarcity and, oh, I can't possibly connect with this person because they're going to take all my clients, or they won't want to connect with me because they're going to think that I'm going to, poach their work. That has not been my experience at all.
Nope.
In fact, quite the opposite. So, for anyone listening who's thought about this, and reaching out, and you don't even necessarily need to, I think, align perfectly with, views and methodology. I think, a general sense is sometimes good, but I certainly have conversations with folks who use, different tools and different ways of teaching than I do. And I don't believe in perfectly passing purity tests in order to connect with another human being who at their core is still caring about the same things I do.
Mhm. That's really beautifully said. Thank you. So, if you could grant a wish or bestow a blessing upon pet professionals, what would you give us all? I feel like you've already given us so much, but I'm curious to know how you'd synthesize.
I think the wish would be for some bravery to put yourself out there a little bit, and to, I'm looking at the sign behind you which says show up for yourself. And I think part of showing up for yourself is actually showing up around other people, and ideally in person. So, and even if that's, outside of the field, again, connecting with other human beings, even if there are no animals around, that I think is the biggest piece of showing up for yourself. And it does take some bravery. And many of us, I think, who do work with animals would identify as introverts. It doesn't necessarily, this isn't something that needs to be every day or all the time. Um, every once in a while, just see, like, can I step outside my comfort zone a little bit and connect with another human? It can even be a simple conversation with somebody who's, walking down the street with their dog. Right? It doesn't need to your neighbors, literally. It doesn't necessarily need to be, you have a goal in place, but to say hello, to compliment somebody else on their dog, to start, even if it's just small talk. Um, there's a lot underneath the surface of those words that can be very healing.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So if people wanted to learn more about you and your work, Holden, how could they do that?
So the easiest way would probably be through my website, which is holdencanine.com. I imagine you'll put a link in the description
I will
there.
link it.
And I can also be found certainly through the Pet Professional Guild with our rescue division, which is the committee that is dedicated to supporting shelter and rescue organizations.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me today, Holden. It's been really a treat.
Thank you so much, Colleen, for doing this. I really look forward to listening to future episodes and your future guests as well.
Thank you. That's our conversation for today. If something we talked about resonated, I invite you to sit with it. Notice what feels true and what you want to explore further. You don't have to have it all figured out to start moving toward what matters. Whatever showed up for you today, clarity, questions, even resistance, trust that it's pointing you towards something important. For more support, join my weekly notes at colleenpilar.com. And until next time, remember, you are enough. Always, just as you are.